Welcome to the Private Practice with Soul podcast. My name is Dr. Storme, and I help private practice owners align their business back with their soul's calling, with their big vision and with their soul's purpose. Unlike other private practice coaches, I've traveled the world in search of spiritual resources, spiritual tools, education and information so that you can have the transformation that your soul desires and needs so that you can up-level your business. How much fun is this? I love it so much. Guys, if you're not already a member of the Private Practice Monthly Mentorship Group, please check out the show notes. I would love for you to be there. In the meantime, thank you so much for pushing play today. Let's begin. Hello everybody, happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Private Practice with Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Storme, and I'm so grateful and thankful that you're here listening to another episode. I want to welcome all of the new listeners. We're at 1.1k listeners now, and I'm just so pleased that you're here. I can't thank you enough. It's so inspiring for me to be able to bring these podcasts to you, and I know people are listening to them and getting some benefit from them. As you would have seen from the title, today what I want to talk about is something that I guess might be a little bit controversial. I don't know what it's like in other countries. Like, I know we have listeners here from the UK and from Canada and from New Zealand. I can really only speak to my experience here in Australia, but if you have a similar experience, I'd love to hear about it. And you can send me an email anytime to hello@brooklynstorm.com. But, I've been working with private practice owners for a few years now. And, recruiting is, a challenge in Australia anyway. A lot of private practice owners really struggle to find the right candidate for their role, and they end up perhaps sometimes hiring out of desperation, or they leave the recruiting too late, or they don't get any responses to their job ads and things like that. It's kind of a bit of a messy situation, because I think part of what happens is we learn how to be really good therapists and practitioners, but we don't ever learn how to be a good practice owner. And part of that is about recruiting for your business, right? And so what you do is you look at what everybody else is doing and you copy that, and then you wonder why it doesn't work. And if you're somebody who's been trained in the private practice method, you'll know that this just doesn't work because you're completely out of alignment, right? So what I want to do today is talk with you a little bit about, let's dispel some of the misperceptions out there around hiring counsellors. And, I'm not advocating for any profession over another. This has just come about as an observation. So over the weekend, I was talking to a group of private practice owners, and one of the things that came up was this belief that, if we hire counsellors for our business, then nobody's really going to book in with them because our clients aren't going to be able to access a Medicare rebate. So we don't even consider hiring counsellors really. And I thought that was so interesting. And it's interesting for me, I guess, because I'm sitting on the outside. I'm not in a position where I'm hiring team at the moment. In the past, I have hired counsellors. I do have a counsellor on my team now. And for me, it's just kind of been a really positive experience. And so I'm always interested to hear the thinking that other practice owners have behind why they wouldn't hire a counsellor. So this idea was sort of raised, and as soon as it was sort of out there, other people started like nodding their heads and saying, yeah, it's a real problem because we just can't fill the diary for somebody who's going to be a counsellor. And it doesn't make sense to have a counsellor because the entire fee is going to be an out-of-pocket expense, which means our clients would be paying more to see a counsellor than they would to see a social worker or a psychologist, and that's just not fair on the social worker or the psychologist. And I was like, this is so interesting. I mean, to me, it's just kind of fascinating. Like, I can understand why people believe this, and all you've got to do is go into some of the Facebook groups that are available at the moment for the helping professions, and you see it's like this pervasive narrative in the industry that counsellors are somehow less than other professions. But I think really that's quite a very old way of thinking. I think that's very outdated. And I think that what we're beginning to see emerge now is like a new generation or a next generation of practice owner that is beginning to see that counsellors, just like psychologists and social workers, are professionals in their own right, okay? And I think this is really exciting because when we're able to see, I'm just talking about those three professions because they're the three I tend to deal with the most. But when we can see that counselling, social work and psychology are all separate, I think that helps alleviate some of the misconception and some of that really limiting thinking around fees and clients, what people will and won't pay and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, if it were true that clients wouldn't pay to see a counsellor if they can go and get a rebate from a social worker or a psychologist, then we'd have a situation where counsellors in private practice wouldn't be profitable because they wouldn't be working with anybody, and we know that's just not the case. So I think part of what happens is we are exposed to this thinking or this pattern, you know, in our different groups, in our different industry groups and organisations and bodies and all that sort of jazz. I think sometimes, you know, each one of those areas has their own dominant beliefs, you'd agree, and has their own dominant narratives. And I think when you're exposed to that often enough, it starts to become your narrative and it starts to become your belief. And I think that that's the issue, because when that becomes embedded in your subconscious mind, that becomes then your reality. And so you find it very, very difficult to change that, you know, without hard work. It's going to take time because all sorts of defenses are going to come up. If you believe that, you know, what I was just saying, those other ladies were talking about on the weekend, if you believe that people aren't going to book in with your counsellor because it will cost them more than a session with another professional, then, you know, you kind of like, that's going to be your reality. But there are other practices that do it really well around Australia. There are other practices that do it really well. They have psychologists and social workers and counsellors, and nobody's getting upset about who's charging what. And the reason for that is because these are progressive practices that respect and that honour and that embrace the difference and the overlap between each of those three professions. So if you think about like a little Venn diagram, and maybe you can, in your mind's eye, you might imagine the shape of a triangle, okay? And inside that triangle, if you like, there's a circle up the top and then a circle on the left and right down the bottom. And all of those circles kind of overlap in the middle, don't they? Because there is some overlap between the work of a social worker and the work of a psychologist. We all are in agreement about that. And there is some overlap between the work of a counsellor and the work of a psychologist. There is some overlap between the work of a counsellor and the work of a social worker, and you get the idea. There's always going to be overlap, but guess what? That overlap is quite small, isn't it? There's more difference than there is sameness or similarity in how we all work. So by, you know, comparing or by saying one profession is better than another or one profession is more valuable than another, all you're doing is devaluing that service, and you're putting restrictions on the way that you want to show up and help the people that really, really need help right now, okay? We are in the midst of a pandemic, right? We all know this. And in Australia, what the statistics are showing is that there's been quite a significant increase in the number of people that are needing support, all kinds of support, whether it's counselling, whether it's social work, whether it's psychology. The need has gone up. So much so, in fact, that the government have recently, you know, extended telehealth rebates for Medicare services and all that sort of jazz, right? In recognition of the increased need. Now, I know too that with this increased need, there are a number of practices that are already at capacity that have either closed their books or that aren't taking on new referrals, or that are just adding new referrals onto an already extended wait list, you know, over 4 weeks. Some people that I talk to have wait lists of 6 months. Okay, so when they get new referrals, they're adding that new referral onto a 6 month long waiting list already. Now, not all of those people that are on your waiting list as a practice owner will need to see a psychologist or a social worker. There will be a number of people on that wait list that are more than happy to come and talk to your counsellor. But here's the thing, if you don't understand the value of a counsellor, if you don't understand the value of counselling, you're not going to be able to effectively market that referral or that connection for your client, right? You'll do it in a very hesitant way where you're holding back, where you're kind of almost apologizing for it, where you're kind of, I don't know, it's just that awkward space. You'll have awkwardness about it. And then what will happen is that awkward energy is going to transpire over to your client, and then your client's going to say, no, I'm happy to stay on the 6-month waiting list. That's fine. And that's just because they've picked up on that energy, right? But if you come at it from an energy where you believe in the value that counselling can bring to this particular client or to this particular presenting issue or whatever it is, then it's going to be very easy for you to help anybody on your waiting list by picking up the phone and saying, hey, our psychologist and social worker are at capacity and it's going to be a while before they see someone. However, we have a counsellor on board now, and this is how she or he can support you, and we can get you in really quickly, and these are the options, and this is what the fee is. No, there's no rebate, but let me know what you think. Right? Now, I've worked with practice owners that are in the process of hiring a counsellor or who have hired a counsellor and are filling the diaries. And they're doing it really successfully because they understand now. Okay, it took a shift. It took unlearning an unhelpful narrative and replacing it with one that became more helpful. The new narrative is around how can possibilities for the practice, how can possibilities for the clients, how can possibilities for referrers now open up, given that my counsellor doesn't have a waiting list, right? What's that going to mean for clients, for referrers, and for the community in general? So starting to think about what becomes possible when you let go of, misinformation or ideas that aren't serving you, ideas that aren't serving your clients. And if people know that you have capacity to take on clients and it's with a counsellor and you're comfortable speaking about how that counsellor helps and what she or he can do and all of that sort of stuff, what if that then resulted in more referrals? What if that happened? Who's to say it wouldn't happen? You don't know that. And here's the other thing, like just a little bit of a tip here for you. Maybe don't speak to doctors about referring to counsellors, because doctors work within that medical model, right? And the way psychology has gone and the way social work is going looks to be within that medical model. They are on Medicare, the medical model, right? Counsellors, one of the values and the strengths of counsellors is they work outside of that medical model. And if you've had a private practice for any length of time like I have, then you will know that you've sat down with clients who don't want to work with somebody in that medical model, right? The medical model doesn't suit everybody. Not all clients want CBT. Not all clients need to have a full psychometric assessment and be diagnosed and be told what their symptoms are and what treatment course they need and all of that, right? That's psychology stuff. That's not counselling. And so is there a need, do you think, with some of the clients that you've already got on your books for support that kind of sits outside of that medical model? Can you just think off the top of your head 2 or 3 clients that'll probably actually be a really good fit for a counsellor? Maybe 2 or 3 clients that kind of don't need the CBT manualised approach. I'm just saying that because that's my background. I did my PhD in that. There are many evidence-based interventions. I just always use that as my example. But who would benefit from sitting down and doing something that's a little bit more person-centered, perhaps, that might benefit from sitting down with somebody that just holds space for them, sitting down with somebody that supports them through a journey through, their own narrative rather than is providing a specific treatment. I mean, I'm sure, like I can even think of 5 or 6 people on my old caseload that wanted that. And I was able to switch them over to that. And you can too, okay? There are plenty of opportunities for work for a counsellor in your practice. And if you're stuck, if you don't know how a counsellor differs from a psychologist or how a counsellor differs from a social worker, why don't you talk to one and ask them, what can you do? How can you do it? How do you differ? All right. And find out, ask the question. And you know what? I was talking about counsellors in a Facebook group recently and copped a little bit of flack for it. Somebody was saying, oh, you're overgeneralizing and da 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 da. Look, this is just my opinion, okay? It's absolutely 100% my opinion and I stand by it. And I do, when I'm talking about the role of counsellors in your practice, of course I'm meaning people who have done training and who have a qualification. I'm not referring to people who've done no training or maybe they've done the 2-day workshop. No, of course you're not going to be employing them. But there are plenty of counsellors out there looking for work at the moment who have a master's in counselling and can't find a job because of the narrow-mindedness of private practice owners, right? This is just my opinion, but I absolutely stand for the benefit in seeing the value that a counsellor can bring to your private practice. And if you want to talk more about this, please, I would love any comments. I want to open up the discussion about this. As I said, I think it's all starting to change now. I think there's a new generation of private practice owners that are emerging that do absolutely embrace the value and the difference between each of those roles, how they overlap and how they're different. And that's so exciting to see. And there are absolutely already practices around Australia and no doubt the world, I'm sure, that do this really, really well. But I think there's also a lot of practices that could be doing it better. And especially there are so many reasons why, so many practice owners are struggling to find staff, but they haven't really considered hiring a counsellor. That's just one example. So anyway, that's what I would love for you to take away from this episode. I want you to really think about what could be possible for your practice if you hired a counsellor. What would become possible for your clients? Think about all those poor people sitting on wait lists that can't get in to see one of your other team members. Is it going to hurt to offer them counselling? No, it gives them an opportunity to either get help sooner, and that's their decision, not yours, surely. They can opt in or opt out, right? But they need to know if there's anything to opt in or opt out of. And isn't that part of your role as a practice owner to provide them with that option? It's if none of them decide to take you up on it, that's okay. You've done the right thing in asking, I believe. What's it going to mean for referrals to your practice if a word gets around that your counsellor has capacity to see people? What will become available for your practice then? I'm just looking at my notes now to see if I've covered everything off for you. So anyway, and look also at the bottom line of your practice as well. At the moment, maybe you don't have a counsellor, so you're not actually generating any turnover from that stream because it doesn't exist for you yet. But think about what could exist in terms of turnover for your practice if you did add that stream, right? And there are lots and lots and lots of many ways, just like there are to utilise the skills and expertise of a social worker and a psychologist, to use the skills and expertise of a counsellor. Okay, so that's just what I would love you to go away and have a little bit of a think about today, and making sure that, whoever you have on your team is there for the right reason, is there because their role aligns deeply with the values and the standards of your practice, that aligns at a soul level for you as a practice owner, and that aligns with the needs of your clients, okay? I know not everybody wants to hire every type of profession. That's okay. I'm not saying we all should, but it's just something that I want you to start being more open to. If you step back and look at the bigger picture of the vision you have for your practice and bringing that into alignment, what could it mean for your business to have a counsellor on board? Okay, how would that help with your alignment? It's so exciting, isn't it? I love talking about this sort of stuff, and it's by no means innovative. It's been so I don't know, I just feel like counselling has just kind of been stuck. It's just kind of hit this glass ceiling in terms of employment opportunities and in terms of moving ahead and being recognised for the work that all the counsellors do. And I just want to try and help energetically create a little bit of a shift or get a little bit of momentum behind that, because I see, if some of my standards are around compassion, kindness, love, opportunities, all that sort of stuff, and I just see the value in that role, and I'm really excited for where it's going to go. And counsellors, stand up. You have a voice, use it. You don't have to go along with everybody comparing you to psychologists and social workers. We can work together. Let's look at how the three industries can integrate better for the greater good of our clients. Let's get out of ego. Let's get out of that ego mind, and let's come together and look at how we can create services that are going to support people in our community in new and exciting ways. Okay, it's so exciting. All right, guys, have a beautiful, beautiful Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Private Practice with Soul podcast today. If you're looking for clarity, if you need help with branding, your processes, and bringing everything into alignment with your soul's purpose for your private practice, head to the show notes and click the link for more information about the Private Practice Monthly Mentorship Group. You are going to love it. I can't wait to see you in there. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.